Today we're going to learn Yevamot Daf Gimel. This is the Daf for Shabbat. We're going to start with a quick review of some things we saw yesterday. So we started with this machloka between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon about a man who sleeps with a woman who is forbidden for multiple reasons. And then we saw, I'm not going to get into all the details of what the order is and all that. Rabbi Yossi in general says you're, in the particular case that we saw there, again, how you define it, we'll talk about in a minute, you're obligated two. And Rabbi Shimon says you're only obligated one. To which Rabbi Avau said that, by the way, when we talk about Rabbi Shimon saying two, he's only talking about in the case he really thinks Ein Isur Chalal Isur. That's the principle we're discussing here. Once something is forbidden, we don't add another prohibition. But unless it's in a case of what we call Isur Kolel, and unless we call it Isur Mosif, where the new prohibition is adding more people to who it's prohibited. But if it's Isur Kolel, which is that he was first forbidden to the woman because of Esharach. Then he was also forbidden because she's married, right? Two sisters married two brothers. Then she became forbidden because of Achot Ishto. So there aren't more people who are forbidden to her. But it's that there's now she is forbidden for more reasons, right? There's another Isser upon her for him, right? Another prohibition. That's called Isur Kolel. In that case, he will say that Isur he only thinks, I hope I didn't say this wrong before, he only thinks Isur Chalal Isur, we're going to add Isur when it's Isur Mosif, when we add not only is she his wife's sister, but now she's actually his brother's wife as well. Okay? Then we're adding on, she is now not only forbidden to him, first she was forbidden because he's married to her sister, now she's forbidden to all the other brothers as well. That's Isur Mosif, then we're going to add on another prohibition. But if it's Isur Kolel, no. That's the way Rabbi Avau understood Rabbi Yossi. Then the Gemara came and said, Ube Plukta. That whole issue is actually a machloket, which we're going to suggest. In the end, we're going to reject it. But right now, we're going to think that Rabbi Yossi, there's a disagreement about whether it's a disagreement between Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Bar Kapara about whether Rabbi Yossi thinks that Isur Kolel, you're chayav one or you're chayav two. And they bring three cases that they think right now are Isur Kolel. One, we saw these all yesterday, non-Kohen who works in the temple on Shabbat. So first he's a non-Kohen who works in the temple. Then the Isur of Shabbat gets added on. That's an Isur Kolel, okay, because it's not forbidden to more people. It's more things forbidden to him. Then we have a Baal Mum, Sheshimesh B'tumah. The first, the Baal Mum can't do work in the temple, but he can't eat. Once he becomes impure, he can't eat as well. And then we have a Zar She'achal Malika. We have a non-Kohen who then eats Malika. Malika is the way to sacrifice in the temple, bird offerings. It's generally considered nevela. Outside the temple, you can't eat it. So now we have a Zal who wasn't allowed to eat it in general and wasn't allowed to eat Kodashim, sanctified, right? Anything, any chatat. We're talking about a sin offering of the bird. And then he eats it with Malika. So it's Isur Nevela and it's a Zar that eats Kodashim. So now the Gemara says, "B'mai kamiftage." Now we had this whole thing. Each one swore, "I swear that Rebbe taught me." Rabbi Chia says, "I swear that Rebbe taught me two, and that you're chayav twice." And comes Baruch Bar Hanus, "I swear Rebbe taught me once." Now, if you notice there, it doesn't make any mention of Rabbi Yossi, but we're assuming that what they're arguing about is what Rebbe taught them about Rabbi Yossi. And we're going to see there's three different options about what exactly they were arguing about. So first we assume, starting at the beginning of our daf now, b'mai kamiftage. What's their machloket? B'isur kolel v'aliva de Rabbi Yossi. We assume it's the Rebbe taught them that all these cases, what's the common denominator? They're all isur kolel. And it's according to Rabbi Yossi. And then Rabbi Chia saval, Rabbi Yossi b'isur kolel machayev tarte. Bar Kapara savar lo machayev elachada. And then we see that what Rabbi Avau said, that in Isur Kolel, Rabbi Yossi is only machayev one. He only thinks you're liable for one. Now we're going to see it's a machloka whether you're actually obligated one or two, according to Rabbi Yossi. That's the first option. In the end, we're going to reject this entirely, but right now that's what we think. So now they say, my Isur Kolel ikahacha, but wait a minute. How do we call all of these Isur Kolel? Isur Kolel, again, is first it was forbidden for one reason, then it becomes forbidden for multiple, right? A new reason. So Bish Lamazal, the Zar makes perfect sense. First, you can't do work in the temple. Then it becomes forbidden for you to, first you can do, my mistake, Shari b'malacha. You can do any malacha, like Shabbat malachot. You could do that anywhere you want. But you're asur b'avodah, but you can't work in the temple. Until Shabbat. As soon as Shabbat comes in, migo dekai mitzvah v'malacha, mitzvernami b'avodah. When you become forbidden to do malacha, you then become forbidden to do avodah as well, right? So now that's what we call Isur Kolel. Now you're forbidden also to do the avodah because it's Shabbat. What about the next one? Balmum meikara shari ba'achila v'asur ba'avodah. So the balmum first can eat, because balmum can eat sanctified meat that's left for the kohanim, but can't do avodah. But he can't work in the temple because he has a blemish. Once he becomes tamei, once he becomes forbidden to eat, he then becomes forbidden to do work as well. Right now it's both. So now we have an extra isur upon him of Shabbat. Ela Malika, but Malika, we have a bit of a problem. Why? Malika bebat echat hu de mishkachala. Malika can only happen at one time. Why? Because when you do the Malika, that's when the meat becomes forbidden to you at that moment, because it's sanctified meat that was slaughtered. But it wasn't slaughtered, you did Malika, and then it's Nevela. So all that happens at the exact same moment. So now that's not Isur Kolel. Isur Kolel is where it was once forbidden for one reason and now becomes forbidden for multiple reasons, right? Another reason. So you can't say that this is Isur Kolel. So that's why they say, Bevat Echad you can find it, but Isur Kolel lo mishkachala. That's something different. That's a different category. So option number 2 is to reject that, in which case, what we said, Rabbi Abau was a machloket. It's not true. What Rabbi Abau said, right, that it's debatable. It's not debatable. That's not what the machloket is about. Option number 2, and we'll see there'll be option number 3, we're going to reject this one as well, is that again, right now we've left Rabbi Abau, and now we're just trying to figure out what's this machloket between Bar Kapar and Rabbi Chia. So now we assume it's about things that happen simultaneously. Now let's try to come up with the logic. On one hand, you could say this logic is not going to be so convincing, but maybe when they all happen at the same time, then you're only one, because Isur Kolel is one came, and then there was an additional, so the additional can go on the other one. The problem with saying that is when you have the Bevat Echad, it's actually much more logical to say you're actually obligated both, even if you don't think so in Isur Kolel. Why? Isur Kolel is one started and another was added. Then you could say Ein Isur Chalal Isur. When they both happen at the same time, there's no major one that you're going to say that's the one, and then this one was added. There is no one added. They both happened at the same time. In that case, you may have no choice but to say you're actually obligated both. So now let's see what the Gemara has to say. So now we're going to say their machloket is bebat echad, and again, they're trying to explain what Rabbi Yossi holds. Rabbi Chia savar Rabbi Yossi b'isur bat echad b'chayav tartin. And he'll say Rabbi Yossi holds, even though Isur Kolel, he only held one, like Rabbi Avau said, but in Isur Kolel, Rabbi Yossi is going to actually be b'chayav 2, exactly for the logic I just said. So they both happen at the same time. You can't really choose one over the other. Ubar kapara savar lo m'chayav el echad. Just like Rabbi Yossi says one there, in Isur Kolel, he'll say one here as well. Again, remember, Rabbi Yossi says by the woman, but that's because it's Isur Mosik. It's something different according to Rabbi Abahu and not Isur Kolel. So now they say, V'hacha my Isur bat echad ikahacha. But wait a minute, right? And then Bar Kapara basically says Rabbi Yossi holds only one, and then they're going to say, but wait, how can we have bat echad? Zar sheshimesh b'Shabbat, right? First Zar, then Shabbat. So how can you have a case? We could come up with a case. Kigon da'ayte she sarot b'Shabbat. Might be very unique, but it's talking about a child who just became the Gil Mitzvot. He had 2 hairs grew specifically on Shabbat, and therefore all of it happens at the same moment, right? All the Isurim come upon him at the same time. Both the Zar, that you can't work in the temple, and Shabbat all come at once. Balmum Nami, same thing with the Balmum. Again, just when he got Shtei Sarot, at the same moment, he became Tameh. These are a little bit hard to fathom that exactly this happened to someone who at that exact age. Okay, but here's even maybe a better answer. Inami, with the Balmum, we could come up with another case. Shechatach etzba'o b'sakin tmeah. He cut off his finger, which would make him a Balmum, with an impure knife. Now, usually knives don't have impurity that can get people impure, but knives actually can. There's a unique din of Tumah called halal cherev. If it's something like a knife that could kill a person, because of a verse, they darshan it out about halal cherev, about a body that was destroyed by a sword. They learn from there that a knife that could potentially have killed somebody carries, or that did kill somebody, or that either killed someone or came in contact with a dead person, carries a high level tumah that could actually make a person impure. So therefore, if he cut off his finger with that kind of knife, then he became a Baal Mum at the exact same time that he became impure. That's a more creative answer. That maybe, I don't know, which is more likely. They're both pretty unlikely. Bishlam, right? How many times people actually cut off their fingers with a knife? Not the most common thing. So now they're going to have another problem though. So again, we're within the explanation. It's bebatachat. We came up with cases where we could say they're batachat. Malika, we already know is batachat. That we already explained. Bishlam ala Rabbi Chia. So now we have to test this a little bit further. Each of them swore in the name of Rebbe that Rebbe taught them that. Now we're assuming, we don't know, but we're putting in the blanks based on what we explained. That in the case of batachat, Rabbi Yossi said 2, and the other one said, I swear Rebbe taught me that Rabbi Yossi said 1. We're going to have a little bit of a problem here. Bishlam ala Rabbi Chia, ki atniye ledide aliva de Rabbi Yossi, ki atniye kapara aliva de Rabbi Shimon. We now have to understand not only what did each person think, but how did he understand the other person? Rabbi Chia said, when I was taught, right, when I was taught etniye from Lashon Litana, Shnot, to learn, when I was taught by Rebbe, aliva de Rabbi Yossi, he taught me that Rabbi Yossi said 2. And when Bar Kapara was learned from Rabbi Yossi and swore in the name of Rebbe, the assumption here is no one was lying. They each swore because they were convinced. Now, what was Bar Kapara's mistake according to Rabbi Chia? Bar Kapara confused Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yossi. Remember, Rabbi Shimon in general, in Yisur Mosif, for example, says 1 and Rabbi Yossi holds 2. So comes Rabbi Chia and he says also in Batachat, Rabbi Yossi holds 2, Rabbi Shimon holds 1. You were confused. Rebbe taught you Rabbi Yossi. You thought it was Rabbi Shimon. I'm sorry. Rebbe taught you Rabbi Shimon. You thought it was Rabbi Yossi. You got confused. So that makes sense. But Ela Bar Kapara, Rabbi Chia Shikuri Kamashakir. But according to Rabbi Bar Kapara, where he says both Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yossi are only going to hold 1. So there is no Tana who holds 2 in that case. In which case, right, in the case of Isur Batachat, in which case nobody holds 2. In which case, what? When Rabbi Chia said, I swear that it's 2, Bar Kapara just thought he was lying, right? There's no, if he could say, you thought you heard Rebbe say about someone else, but there is no one else. In other words, it's very easy in the one, right, to switch and say, oh, Bar Kapara, you got mixed up. It was Rabbi Shimon. It wasn't Rabbi Yossi. Yeah, there's no Tana that he can rely on. So there's no way to explain Rabbi Chia except that he's lying. And, it's hard to say that. Ella, therefore, we reject that explanation. Third explanation. Now we're switching. Each time we switch one thing. First, we started with Isur Kolel and Aliba de Rabbi Yossi, right? Isur Kolel according to Rabbi Yossi. Then we said, oh no, it's not Isur Kolel, it's Isur Batachat, because the third case never comes up in a scenario where it's Kolel. So it can only be, if the third is Batachat, we must assume all of them are Batachat, and then it's Aliba de Rabbi Yossi. That we had a problem with. So now we change it. Oh, it's Batachat, which made sense with case number 3. And therefore, case number 1 and 2 are the same as that. But it's Aliba de Rabbi Shimon. It's what did Rabbi Shimon hold? So now we're going to have a problem with this as well, though. 2 problems. Bishlam ala Rabbi Chia kamishtabe. Why did each one of them swear? They swore. They must have been saying something unique. So Rabbi Chia makes perfect sense. Rabbi Shimon generally is minimalist about Isur Halal Isur. He generally says, Ein Isur Halal Isur. You can't have, right? You're not going to be high of both. So that's why he swears. Rabbi Shimon Mecheske says, I swear the Rebbe taught me that Rabbi Shimon holds 2 because this is unique. But Elul Bar Kapara, but for Bar Kapara, why does he need to swear? That's just the typical approach of Rabbi Shimon. 1, he holds 1 in general. So of course he holds 1 here. You don't need to say, I swear I learned this. Yeah, you could claim, well, he was trying to say, I disagree with you, but still. Kash. So that's a little difficult, but it's not the biggest difficulty. But here we have a bigger difficulty. Bishlam Bar Kapara. Now we're going to have the inverse of the previous. Bar Kapara makes sense because what was he thinking? Ki etniye Rebbe lidide aliba de Rabbi Shimon. Okay, when Rebbe taught me that you're only chayav 1, he taught me according to Rabbi Shimon. Ki etniye Rabbi Chia aliba de Rabbi Yossi. When he taught Rabbi Chia 2, he was teaching him according to Rabbi Yossi's opinion. So ki etniye, right? And then that's where Rabbi Chia got confused. He thought it was Rabbi Shimon, but really it was Rabbi Yossi. Okay, that makes sense. Ela le Rabbi Chia, you see why this is the flip of the previous. Le Rabbi Chia, Bar Kapara, Shikorei Kamashakir. But according to Rabbi Chia, nobody holds 1 in this case. Everybody holds, and this was the logic I said before. If they happen all at the same time, you can't choose one over the other. It's going to be you're obligated both. If that's the case, right, you're liable for both. If that's the case, what? Bar Kapara is just lying when he said 1? Nobody holds 1. So here we're going to have a possible explanation. We're going to get a little creative as to what Rabbi Chia thought that Bar Kapara was confused about. In other words, where in Rabbi Chia's mind was Bar Kapara's confusion? Amar lecha Rabbi Chia, he could explain like this. Ki etniye Rebbe ledide, when Rebbe taught Bar Kapara, tarte liftor etniye. He actually didn't teach him all three cases. He only taught him the first two, which we said could theoretically be Isur Kolel, right? We in the end explain them as Batachat. But if we get rid of case 3, then we could say it's Isur Kolel. So here comes his confusion. It's a little bit long-winded, but you'll see in a minute. The Isur Kolel etniye, he really taught him Isur Kolel cases, not Isur Batachat. Ba'aliba de Rabbi Shimon, and he taught him Isur Kolel according to Rabbi Shimon. So basically, now we're going to get Rabbi Chia was talking about Isur Batachat, right? The 3 cases, and it's all at the same moment, and that's why you're obligated to, according to even Rabbi Shimon. But what was Bar Kapara's mistake? He learned from Rebbe about these 2 cases, 2 out of 3, but not in a scenario where they happened at the same moment, but a scenario where one came after the other. But what happened? He saw that case in front of him, and he heard about that case, and he said, oh, that seems to me like the same thing. So we put them together as a threesome. They didn't really belong together, right? They belong together if you call them Batachat. But the thing he learned from Rebbe was really about Isur Kolel, when one happened after the other. Once he stuck them all together, then he started to think about it. Well, are these cases right there? They can only be similar. It's a little bit long, kind of convoluted. First, he put them together because they seem to be the same, but then he realized the only way to make them the same is if you make them all Batachat. Right? When he sat about it and thought about it, he said, well, the only way these 3 could be exactly the same is if they all happen at the same time. And therefore, the Savar midahaba Batachat, hanami b'Batachat. Then he said, well, if the Malika case can only be Batachat, then the other 2 cases must be Kebatachat, b'Batachat at the same time. And midahanach liftor, hanach nami liftor. And because those 2 Rebbe said were exempt, that one's also exempt. In other words, he did this very circuitous thing where he basically started with learning about 2 cases of Isur Kolel, since, right, the Rebbe taught him and said, Rabbi Shimon holds that in Isur Kolel, right, you're going to be high of 2. I'm sorry, you're going to be high of 1 only in Isur Kolel. But then he thought, when he added the 3rd case, he realized, well, the only way to have them similar is Batachat. So then he reinterpreted the 2 cases here from Rebbe as if Rebbe had told him they were Batachat, but they weren't. In which case he thought that Rebbe held in Batachat, Rabbi Shimon only holds 1, but he was wrong because Rabbi Shimon wasn't talking about Batachat at all. He was talking about Isur Kolel, where one happens after the other. And he didn't even bring up the Malika case. And Bar Kapara just came up with this whole thing in his mind. That's what Rabbi Chia says. So it's better than saying he lied, because he didn't lie. He just made some incorrect conclusions. Now, the Gemara is going to have a question on Bar Kapara. So that's our 3rd explanation, which seems to be right. The Machloket is about Batachat. Again, Bar Kapara thinks that he's right, but according to Rabbi Chia thinks that Bar Kapara is wrong. Now they're going to bring a question, contradictory source on Bar Kapara's opinion according to this. The Rabbi Shimon holds that you're high of 1 only in Batachat. So now in a Braita it says, Zar sheshemesh b'Shabbat, u'Ba'al sheshemesh b'Tumah are 2 cases that we had in the beginning. A Zar who works in the temple on Shabbat and a Ba'al that works b'Tumah. Yesh chamishum zarut u'mishum Shabbat, u'mishum Ba'al u'mishum Tumah, divrei Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says each time you're chayav twice. Rabbi Shimon Omer, ein kan ela mishum zarut u'Ba'al bilvad. It's only zarut and only Ba'al. Now notice what's missing. Ilu Malika Shaira. Malika is missing from this list. So, Leman Shaire, according to who was it left off on purpose? Ilema Rabbi Yossi. If it's Rabbi Yossi, well, remember, that's Batachat, the Malika case, which is more likely we're going to say 2. So, if Rabbi Yossi said 2, Hashta Rabbi Yossi, Bisur Kol Machayev Shtayim, if he said 2 in the other case where it's one after the other, of course, Bisur Batachat Mibaya, of course he's going to say Bevatachat, when they both happen at the same time and there's no one stronger than the other, of course you're going to be chayav 2. So they didn't leave it off the list for Rabbi Yossi. They must have left it off the list for Rabbi Shimon to say that Rabbi Shimon has a different opinion in this case. So again, what would that lead you to say? Alav Rabbi Shimon. And therefore, Rabbi Shimon said in this Braita, you're only chayav 1. He was only talking about Bisur Kolel hu depatal. But Isur Batachat mechayev. This is all assuming that those 3 are a threesome in Batachat, in which case they should have had Malika. The fact that Malika is missing here Let's just show you that Rabbi Shimon must disagree. It's an inference. You could claim otherwise. Maybe they were just mentioning those two cases. But that's how the Gemara works. They assume we can infer that. And therefore, it sounds like you would be chayiv too, even according to Rabbi Shimon. And that's yufta de bar kapara to yufta. So this explanation, Bar Kapara thinks that Rabbi Shimon, even in Isur Batachad, holds only one, would be difficult according to this Braita, again, according to the inference from the Braita. Now we're going to try to understand something a little better about this case. So that's the end of that section, really, but we still have to figure one thing out. Zar sheshemesh b'Shabbat b'mai. What was he doing on Shabbat in the temple? That he reliable? Now, the assumption is of this sugya, and the Gemara is going to question that in a minute. The assumption is when it says chayav shtayim, it means 2 sin offerings. If you did it b'shogeg, then since b'mezid, it would be karet. If you did it intentionally, you'd have to get karet. Therefore, b'shogeg, if you did it unwittingly, you would have to bring korban chantat. Then the question is, how many? And that's the discussion, 1 or 2. If that's your working assumption, the Gemara is going to have a bit of an issue. If it's shchita, right? Shchita would be a malacha on Shabbat. You'd be chayav karet, and then you'd have to bring a sin offering if you did it accidentally. Shchita bizar kshera. Shchita is a zar is allowed to do shchita. So if, let's say, by accident you do shchita in the temple on Shabbat, let's say you forgot it was Shabbat. Well, you're only liable for Shabbat. You're not liable for being a non-Kohen who did it, because shchita you can actually do even if you're a non-Kohen. It's not one of the avodot that can only be done by a Kohen. But it's not a ritual that's Kohen only. Let's talk about other rituals. There's Shrita, Kabbalah, Holacha, and Zrika. Okay, Zrika, throwing the blood, is really not an issue. And Iba Kabbalah v'Holacha, and there's no malacha involved. What about accepting the blood and walking the blood? Presumably, you could say the same would be true for sprinkling the blood. Tiltu ba'almahu, that's just carrying something that's muktzah. In other words, you have no use for it, so it's muktzah. Well, something that's muktzah, you don't bring a sin offering for it. That's a derabanan. Iba haktara, maybe it's the burning on the altar, that you make a fire. But Rabbi Yossi himself, who here says you're liable too, says when it comes to making a fire, lighting a fire, you're only chayav lo taseh, which means it's just a lav. That's why havara is specified in the Torah to teach you that it's different from all the other malachot. You don't get karet, which means there's no sin offering. So how can we possibly have a case where there's a sin offering for Shabbat by doing a vote in the temple? So we're going to have one possible answer. You must have been slaughtering the par of the Kohen Gadol, which bizarre psula, only the Kohen Gadol can do it. It's not okay for you to do it. That one korban he has to do himself. He has to do all the avodot of the day, including the slaughtering itself of his bull offering. So then they say, well, then there's another problem. If you assume it's that, in which case he did shechita, and then you have an Isser D'Oraita on Shabbat, and Zar worked in the temple. But then, it shouldn't have said Zar. It should have said anyone who's not the Kohen Gadol, like Kohen Idiot or Zar, right? Because any regular Kohen can't do it either. So they say that's what they meant. Shezar etzlo kama. They meant someone who's not allowed to be doing this, which is anyone under a Kohen Gadol. So then they say, Matkev la Ravashi, but wait, this was all based on midi chataot katani. Doesn't say, you assumed it was talking about korban chatat. It never says, it just says chayav shtayim. Who says they're talking about 2 chataot? Maybe it just means, right, you did 2 things wrong. To which the Gemara asks, right, midi chataot o lave katani. It doesn't even say 2 chatats or 2 lavs, like you would be chayav malkot. Eli isure ba'alma kachashiv. So they say, maybe he's just saying, how many things wrong did you do? To which the Gemara asks, Lamai nafkamina. Who cares how many things wrong? That's a philosophical question. That doesn't interest us. Okay, like we're interested. I mean, yes, philosophy interests the Gemara, but what they're saying is it's a philosophical question. How many bad things did you do wrong in one action? But in the end, what the Gemara is concerned with usually is how much do you have to pay? How many sacrifices you have to bring? How many sets of lashes are you going to get? That's something different. So what do we care if there's no relevance punishment-wise? So what is the relevance? They say, L'kavro ben rasha'im k'murim. Okay, do we bury you? How bad a person are you? How many sins did you do? Right? Now, this is a good question, right? How we figure this out. And this was on yesterday's stuff as well. Shuli wrote about it in Flashback if you haven't read it yet, but on our site. But the idea is that there's a difference. We want to know how there is importance to philosophically, how many bad things did you do wrong? So we know where we categorize you among which people. Okay, that's a whole interesting thing in and of itself. We're going to move on to the next mission. Now we get to another creative, interesting case. So 2 men betrothed 2 women. maybe even at the same time, in the same place. They switched wives in the middle, okay? Either after Kiddushin, before Nisuin, or maybe after Nisuin, before, and then they went home with the wrong wife. Okay, imagine, right? You have a double wedding with a friend and you walk out with the wrong spouse. Right? A little bit strange. Again, maybe, if you have messengers who do things for you, if it was two brothers with two sisters, you could see maybe there would be some confusion. Anyway, it's not clear, although we're going to see in the Gemara, that's what the Gemara is going to try to determine. Was this on purpose or accidental? So now they say, if that's the case, presuming they went home and slept with their new spouses, and the wrong one, they're chayiv mishumei shadish. They were married to someone else. If they were brothers, not only shadish, also mishumei shadach. And imayu achayot, mishum isha lachota. Right? In other words, you could have he was married. She was married to someone else. She was your brother's wife. She was also, if they were sisters, then you married your brother, you slept with your brother's sister, your wife's sister, which is forbidden. Ima you nidot, if they happen to be menstruating at the time, mishum nida. Umafrishin, okay, so that's first part. So you can be high of many things. Umafrishin otash shlosha chodashim. Now, before we let them go back to their husbands, this is going to be our proof, basically, how we know this isn't intentional. If it was intentional, then basically that's znut, right? That's ni'uf, that's adultery. It's worse than snut, right? Snut is not necessarily when they're married, but this is ni'uf, this is adultery. They were with someone else's wife, and what do we say? Asur labal, asur laboel. They're forbidden to their husband, and they're forbidden to the one they slept with. So they wouldn't be able to go back to their wives. So this seems to indicate they go back, but you wait 3 months in case they got pregnant when they have relations, in which case you wouldn't know whose child it is, which is always important in terms of mamzerim issues down the road, who the kid's allowed to marry, etc. If they were young and they couldn't have children yet, then they could go back because we're not worried she's already pregnant. Which we're going to have to explain in the Gemara what this means. Does it mean married to a Kohen? Does it mean bat Kohen, the daughter of a Kohen? Nifsalu min truma, they can't eat truma. Some people have nifsalu min kihuna. We have to see what this is in the Gemara later. So now the Gemara starts with chlifu. It sounds like they switched the women on purpose. Hani b'rishiaskin, midi b'rishiaskin. Are we talking about rishaim here, that they specifically wanted to switch wives and sleep with the other's wife? Vitu, and furthermore, hadatani Rabbi Chia, harekan sheshes chataot. Rabbi Chia says in this case, we're not going to get into this, but he has a bright on this mission that says altogether there's 16 sin offerings possible here that one could need to bring between her, he has to bring, and she has to bring. So now, if he's talking about chataot, sin offerings, that's obviously unwittingly. You only bring sin offerings if it was accidental, not if it was on purpose. So if it was intentional, mika korban, there is no sacrifice that you bring. So Amar Rav Yehuda, Tnei huchlefu, change it to huchlefu. The women got switched and not, right? Sounds like Shlomo HaMelech story. 2 women's babies, they got flipped. They didn't know who was who, right? That's what happened here. And you realize later that they got switched, not like the case before. We didn't know who married who. This case, it just got switched by accident. And then you realized, Hachinami mistabra, it makes sense to say that this was all accidental, as we said before. Well, first of all, they say the katani seifa, the end says, no, ibe mezid, misharia. If it's mezid, you wouldn't be allowed to go back to them. So they say, oh, halo kasha, that's not actually difficult. Because what? If she's a katana, even if it was what we would normally define as adultery, which is both people were willing, as opposed to ones, which was rape, or, she was an unwilling partner. Well, this is a line you'll be happy to see in the Gemara, pitoy ktana ones ninu. If you try to sleep with a ktana and she agrees consensual, it's not consensual, it's rape. Anything a man does to a young woman underage, that's considered rape. That's not consensual, even if she says, I agree, because that's not, right? We all know that to be very logical. Now, if that's the case, even if she was a willing partner, the ktana is not a question, because no matter what, she can go back to her husband, because that's rape. And ones b'Yisrael mishra sharia. If they were married to a Yisrael, a non-Kohen, they can go back to their original husband. The only case of this is a very difficult scenario. If a woman is married to a Kohen, gets raped, she's not allowed to go back and remarry him. Okay? And be not remarried, just be married to her husband. She has to get divorced. So, but here, we're assuming we're talking about a woman who's married to just anyone. So that's why the Ketana can go back, because no matter what, we're going to characterize whatever relation happened with her, whatever act happened, it's going to be considered rape. But Ela dekatani maflishino tashlosha chodeshim shema mubarotin. Now, what does this show? Halat mubarot shari, and it's only because we're worried they might be pregnant. We have to wait the 3 months, but after that, they can go back and be back with their husbands. So it seems like even the older women, as presuming it was consensual, they can go back and be with their husbands. So ibamezid mishari, if it was intentional, right, and not shogeg, that they accidentally switch wives, it wouldn't be permitted. And therefore, elalav shmamina huchlefu shmamina. Therefore, it must be they got switched, and the whole mission is a case of shgaga, of unwitting. Okay, with that, we'll finish for today's shiur. Have a Shabbat Shalom or Shavua Tov to everyone.